Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. We're very fortunate to have Faizal Dawjee, who'll be speaking to us about Muslims in South Africa, past, present, and future. But before we start the main talk, we're going to have the recitation of the Quran. Let's start with Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير. هو الذي خلقكم فمنكم كافر ومنكم مؤمن والله بما تعملون بصير. خلق السماوات والأرض بالحق وصوركم فأحسن صوركم وإليه المصير. يعلم ما في السماوات والأرض ويعلم ما تسرون وما تعلنون والله عليم بذات الصدور. ألم يأتكم نبأ الذين كفروا من قبل فذاقوا وبال أمرهم ولهم عذاب أليم. ذلك بأنه كانت تأتيهم رسلهم بالبينات فقالوا أبشر يهدوننا فكفروا وتولوا واستغنى الله والله غني حميد. زعم الذين كفروا أن لن يبعثوا قل بلى وربي لتبعثن ثم لتنبؤن بما عملتم وذلك على الله يسير. فآمنوا بالله ورسوله والنور الذي أنزلنا والله بما تعملون خبير. يوم يجمعكم ليوم الجمع ذلك يوم التغابن. ومن يؤمن بالله ويعمل صالحا يكفر عنه سيئاته ويدخله جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا ذلك الفوز العظيم. والذين كفروا وكذبوا بآياتنا أولئك أصحاب النار خالدين فيها وبئس المصير. ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله ومن يؤمن بالله يهد قلبه والله بكل شيء عليم. وأطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول فإن توليتم فإنما على رسولنا البلاغ المبين. الله لا إله إلا هو وعلى الله فليتوكل المؤمنون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم عدوا لكم فاحذروهم وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم. إنما أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة والله عنده أجر عظيم. فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم واسمعوا وأطيعوا وأنفقوا خيرا لأنفسكم ومن يوق شح نفسه فأولئك هم المفلحون. إن تقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا يضاعفه لكم ويغفر لكم والله شكور حليم عالم الغيب والشهادة العزيز الحكيم صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much for that beautiful recitation. We are now very fortunate to have Faizal Dawjee here to speak to us about Muslims in South Africa, past, present, and future. Faizal is well known to many in our community, and he's the director of news and current affairs for a newly licensed free-to-air commercial TV network in South Africa. He has a long record of engagement on Muslim-related issues there, and is known very well by many in our community. So let's welcome with salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
How are you, Mikdad?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been a long 10 years since I've been part of the Mahfil community in London. And it's good to be back, although it's a virtual event. And I know it's been a very quick and short notice you've given me, but since you've thrown some, or you did some name dropping, I couldn't refuse. So you have me at your disposal for the next hour or so. And I thought that in structuring the talk this evening, talking about Muslims in South Africa, past, present, and future, I didn't want to spend too much time on the past because I think many of your viewers and people within the broader community have an understanding of the role that Muslims played in the anti-apartheid struggle. And I thought, in view of the current crisis that we are facing here in South Africa, which has flashed across TV screens throughout the world, that I should spend some time speaking about that. But I think it's important to give the context of the role that Muslims have been playing. And I will speak about the role post-1994. That's, in other words, post the advent of democracy in South Africa. So since the advent of democracy in 1994 in our country, for the first time an avowedly Muslim party is now represented in South Africa's national parliament. The Al-Jamaa party, which was formed in 2007, and it had contested elections in 2007 and 2009, and it did not win any seats. It's headed by a Cape Town-based individual by the name of Hanif Hendricks. And he was able to secure a single seat in the country's 6th national elections. And he will now represent the aspirations of a minority of Muslims in parliament. And looking at the Al-Jamaa party, one of its main missions or vision is to support Muslim interests in South Africa and to uphold Sharia law, which is a very noble vision and quite a broad intention it has, but I'll come and I'll speak about that later on. While the single seat in parliament is unremarkable in itself, it does point to a wider and more significant change in attitude among Muslims in exercising their vote and more broadly to issues of political participation. Now, during the country's first democratic elections in 1994, where the African National Congress, under the leadership of Nelson Mandela, swept to a 62% a national vote, or swept to a victory of 62%. And the overwhelming majority of the black population voted for the liberation movement. And Muslims of ethnic Indian and colored black backgrounds came in support of the ANC, as it was seen as a multiracial, multi-ethnic party that brought liberation to the country's masses. Now, more significant to just the perception of the ANC as a liberation party was the prevalence of Muslims with struggle credentials within senior ranks of the ANC. And this was a contributing factor in influencing the Muslim voting public to support the ANC. Since those inaugural elections, there has been a steady decline in Muslim support for the ANC, with a shift towards other parties, namely the opposition Democratic Alliance. Now, the Democratic Alliance is viewed as a predominantly white party, English, Afrikaner, and in last 5 to 6 years, it has managed to attract not a sizable, but a small black African representation. Now, what has caused this gradual shift towards opposition parties? Number one is lack of service delivery. What we call basic services have not been very forthcoming. The rampant corruption, which you sitting in the UK are quite familiar with. And also we have the issue of voter apathy, marginalization of minorities, and general disillusion with politics has fractured the once strong ties that Muslim communities enjoyed with the ruling party. Now, each one in itself can elicit discussions for many hours. But I will tend to just focus on the service delivery aspect and the corruption, because it has particular resonance happening in the country today. Now, according to there was a pre-election survey carried out amongst Muslims, and it showed that the majority of Muslims had showed a significant shift away from the ANC based on lack of service delivery and widespread corruption in the ruling party. In areas with predominant working class Muslims, the vote went to the opposition Democratic Alliance. This was very evident in the Western Cape. Now, I'm not too sure how many are aware of the strong Muslim presence in the Western Cape, where Muslims were brought in from Indonesia and Malaysia in the 1600s as slaves. So the tendency of Muslims to be oppositional and always in a resistance mode is prevalent in the Western Cape. And so this shift away from the ANC was quite significant, because almost 70% of the Muslims that were surveyed indicated that there were two very important factors that determined which way they would vote. Number one is, of course, the service delivery. But the second one is regarding Israel, Palestine, and the Middle East. So even though the DA has a very strong alliance with Israel and refused to condemn the invasion of Iraq and has been lukewarm on other issues in the Middle East, the support for the pro-Israeli Democratic Alliance indicated that everyday issues was nevertheless the determining factor when casting their votes. So in other words, the issues of service delivery, which the DA in the Western Cape is relatively much more competent in meeting the needs of the people. So it was the bread and butter issues that determined which way the majority of the working class Muslims in the Western Cape voted for, even though the issue of Israel and Palestine is very, very close to their hearts. The ANC victory in the predominantly Muslim majority district of the Boer Kaap in Cape Town. Now this is an area, say, the size of Harrow, where the population is almost 95% Muslim. So in these small pockets, the ANC was able to win over the voters. And the reason why they were able to win over was not because of the ANC's strong ties to the liberation movements in Palestine, but it was more attributed to the gentrification project by the DA control council in these historically Malay enclaves or Muslim enclaves. So what was happening was that these properties and houses in the Boer Kaap area, which have been in these families for hundreds of years, 300, 400, 500 years. And what happened was that because it's a low class, working class, very economically depressed area, people need to get out of the poverty cycle and decided to sell their houses. But the area was right in the heart of the city. Strategic, beautiful setting, and the prices that these individuals were asking for their homes, range from almost £500,000 to more than that. And so the Muslim population in that area were very concerned that the atmosphere and the Muslim identity was being lost. So the Democratic Alliance, the opposition party, the council had encouraged rapid economic development in the area, which had led to the disintegration of the area's distinctive character as wealthy foreigners and local investors snapped up property at cut price rates. Prior to the elections, now these were elections that took place in 2019. So it's almost 2 years since, and those 2 years, well, 2020 and 2021. So not much political taking place since the elections. So prior to the elections, of Arts and Culture declared certain sites in the Muslim enclave of Boer Kaap as national heritage sites, offering protection and conservation of this unique cultural heritage. Now that is something that appealed to the Muslims in that area, that the national government is coming out to protect these enclaves. Many commentators attributed the ANC's success in the district to this deft election ploy. Elsewhere in the country, ANC made small gains from the opposition through serious campaigning on the ground. However, the drift to other parties was very significant. Apathy and disengagement with politics was another contributing factor in Muslims staying away from the polls. While the characteristic calls to abstain from voting was made from a few marginal ultra-conservative Muslim groups, mainstream ulama groupings had urged Muslims to participate in the electoral process. One of the biggest theological groups in South Africa, the Jamiat al-Ulama of South Africa, urged Muslims to actively participate in the elections, thereby becoming part of the political process in the future. In fact, the nominally conservative Jamiat al-Ulama, the Secretary General, Maulana Ibrahim Bam, said that it was the responsibility of every South African, irrespective of race or religion, to register to vote. This was a dramatic shift from 1994, where the debate at that time was, should Muslims get involved in politics? And you had diverse views, from voter participation being regarded as totally haram and prohibited, to the more liberal disposition which called on Muslims to participate in the political process. So Maulana Bam added that through the means of voting, we connect ourselves with our fellow citizens. Essentially, he was talking and addressing the Muslim community, because years of detachment from the political process had led to this disillusionment. So he was asking Muslims to reconnect. And he was saying, we also safeguard the freedoms that we have, which everyone cherishes in terms of our religious freedoms. Now, if anyone has studied the South African Constitution, it is regarded as one of the finest constitutions in the world. Absolutely guarantee religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association, unconditionally. And so the levels of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment are almost non-existent. There are, small pockets from right-wing white supremacists, but it's not found in the mainstream discourse or covered in mainstream media. So according to the 2016 General Household Survey published by the Stats South Africa, which collates all the figures in terms of population figures and household consumption, it showed that South Africa is home to roughly 900,000 Muslims. I would think that it's much closer to 1 million. 1 million. This is out of a population of probably 1.6 million so-called Indians. Now remember, Muslim Indians are regarded as part of the broader Indian community. Now this is also doesn't take into consideration the indigenous African population. And I'll come to that a bit later. The majority of Muslims predominantly reside in the Western Cape, Johannesburg, or what was called previously Transvaal, and Natal, where I am presently sitting in Durban. The Muslims who were surveyed indicated their desire for a Muslim party. So this is just prior to the elections. Muslims who were surveyed said, we want a Muslim party, but the voting patterns indicate that they were more inclined to give their vote to a mainstream party which was capable of addressing their day-to-day needs. The entrance of the Al-Jamaa party into parliament is more of an exception than a decisive shift, as faced with a corrupt ANC and an unpalatable opposition. Muslims took the easy route and gave their vote to the Al-Jamaa party. It was a case of less faith, but more about dissatisfaction in the other political parties. With the reduction in the number of Muslims ANCs in parliament, and I'll talk about that a bit later on. South African Muslims find themselves at the crossroads of history once again. That the opposition DA will have equal number of Muslim MPs as the ANC is an indication that the party has incentivized that loyalty, while the ANC has shifted towards what many people believe is an Africanization of the party. Now, at the dawn of democracy, we had probably, at the rough count, about 8 cabinet ministers in national government. And at local and provincial levels, Muslims made up sizable numbers, even holding seats in provincial governments, being what we call MECs and MPs at local levels. So there was a huge number of Muslims involved directly in policy making. Presently, we have only 2 Muslim cabinet ministers. One is the Minister of International Relations, otherwise known as Foreign Relations, Ms. Naledi Pandor. In fact, she was also in the first and second governments of Mandela and Thabo Mbeki. And the second minister we have at the moment is the Minister of Trade and Industry, Ibrahim Patel. So to a large extent, the Muslim representation at national government has been reduced. Now, one has to understand that from 1994, Muslim representation in all spheres of government has been disproportionate because of our small numbers, 1.5, almost 1 million people, but having eight ministers in cabinet, which was astounding. In national parliament today, we probably have only 2 ANC MPs, that members of parliament. The opposition party has much more. So what has caused this sudden shift away? I spoke about the corruption, the distancing from political participation, but the lack of support for the party by Muslims has not gone unnoticed. And as the ruling party embarks on a process of cleansing itself from the past excesses under President Cyril Ramaphosa, perhaps a period of serious reflection on future political engagement and realignment will serve the Muslim community well. Now, this is just a snapshot of what is happening. But there's another voice within this, because predominantly it was the Indian Muslim voice that we all heard about, that was at the forefront. But there is a sizable unheard voice, which I think needs serious attention to. The number of African Muslims, the indigenous Muslims in South Africa, has increased from 9,000 in 1980. Just remember this figure, 9,000 in 1980 to almost 75,000 in 2001. So in a span of 20 years, almost 65,000 indigenous Africans became Muslim. They now make up almost 12% of South Africa's Muslims, as opposed to 2.5% in 1980. Yet, they remain on the margins of the Muslim community. There are various factors that has led to the increase in the numbers. It's the 1980s political protests, students going into exile in Maui and after 1976, work of organizations like the Islamic Propagation Center that was done by Ahmad Didat. I think many people know of Ahmad Didat. However, the Indian Muslim has been very reticent in expanding so-called propagation in the African areas. So in contrast to other parts of Africa where migrant Arab traders were instrumental in locals embracing Islam, in South Africa, Indians have largely remained isolated from Africans, who have historically viewed Islam as an Indian and exploitative religion because of its close association with traders. The other early influx of indigenous Africans took place in 1873, when a ship from Mozambique was blown off course, and it had freed slaves from Zanzibar on board, and it was blown into South African waters, and the ship beached in just off the coast of South Africa, and the community regarded themselves as Zanzibaris, and they were based in the south of Durban, and the government regarded them as freed slaves, and they were categorized as other Asians, which is a strange category in South Africa. But if you understand South Africa, when Arabs from the Middle East visited South Africa, they were given the title of honorary whites, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And since the early 90s, Muslim refugees have come in from the Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, and Malawi, and it has increased the Muslim population in Durban. So Islam's presence in the big townships, during apartheid, the various various ethnic groups and racial groups were herded into separate areas. So you had Indian townships, you had African townships, you had colored townships, and the whites predominantly lived in the cities. And so Islam's presence in Soweto, which was the largest African township in South Africa, and where the 1976 Soweto riots began. The first mosque was built in an area in Soweto, and it remains till today the heart of the Soweto Muslim community. And interestingly, in 2002, right-wing white extremists attacked Soweto, and they planted 9 bombs at the mosque because they were giving out a sign that the nature of Islam, which was in the 90s, in 2000, was becoming much more visible and exerting itself, and becoming much more militant. Militant not in the theological sense, but in resistance and being at the forefront of demonstrations and protests. However, while these enclaves in the African townships were emerging, there was still a huge distrust of Indian Muslims. And I want to quote you a statement by a African woman who embraced Islam in 1971. She said, it is difficult to be a Muslim because people think we've been colonized by Indians. And her son Abdul Aziz added that most blacks don't like Indians. As employers, they do not treat blacks fairly, and blacks wonder why we are following an Indian church. So there has been a deep and entrenched negative perception of Indian Muslims. And as I relate that to what's happening in South Africa today, you will see that manifest both ways, from Indian Muslims themselves and the kind of resentment that black African Muslims suffer. I think I need to just quote you another very telling observation by an indigenous African Muslim who is talking about the constantly changing African Muslim identity. And this is a quote. He says, "We are the have-nots." That is, the African Muslims are the have-nots. They, which he means the Indians, are the haves. They support us with food yearly, pay our electricity, all that. On Tuesdays, you have to be a tablighi and wear a long kurta and speak about the hadith. Why? Because something from that guy. Then the following day, you have to change from tablighism to Sunnism because they are giving something else. And on Sunday, then you have to go to Sufi Sahib to ask for dal and other things. If you are not a Sufi, he won't give you. It's a push. So this is the kind of attitudes that the marginalized African Muslim is experiencing in South Africa. There remains serious problems in the townships, the most significant being the lack of facilities, mosques and madrasas, in a climate of poverty and unemployment. As racial tensions develop, some African Muslims in 2002 decided to boycott Indian mosques. They even marched to the Union Building, which is the seat of government, and presented the then President Thabo Mbeki with a list of their grievances, including racism, exploitation, and unfair distribution of charity. So, what are the challenges that we face? It is important to note that Muslims are divided along race, class, gender, ethnicity, language, and beliefs. So there is no monolithic Muslim group. And so let me just finish this issue of Muslims currently and how I see the future looking like. Just bear with me. So the challenge is to speak about Islam without reverting to binaries. So there's a range of competing elements. Among these elements are contested meanings of what is Islam, the role in a plural society, party political legitimacy, and the different Islamic narratives that are being contested using global and local symbols, which produce specific and hybridized Muslim identities. So, Muslims in the Western Cape often have more in common with non-Muslims than Muslims elsewhere in the country. Working class Muslims in the economically depressed Cape Flats, which is notorious for gang warfare, drugs, social inequality, and just severe poverty. So they share the same common experiences with their Christian neighbors around issues of poverty, drugs, and gangs. Indian Muslims, however, in the rest of the country, mostly lived as Indians under apartheid, where race was central in defining existence. So what is happening now? So boundaries, with the advent of democracy and majority rule in 1994, boundaries are now being constructed between men and women, Muslims and non-Muslims, Islam and secularization. And so instead of Muslims engaging with the political process, Muslims are now deepening their own ethnic identities and forging greater links with the international Muslim community. And social media has played a very important role in this. So while the growth of personal piety features across class lines, it is mainly the affluent who are able to fully embrace most aspects of what we call this liberated era that we find ourselves in. The turn to religious conservatism is of concern, and we see that there is a vast array of outstanding individuals across the country, yet their voices are drowned out within the larger conservative environment. Indigenous black Muslims show the fastest growth in numbers, though they face many difficulties as a result of their geographical dispersion and lack of resources. This is going to be a huge problem for Muslims in the years to come. Up till now, the issue has not been tackled in a serious manner, to the extent where there has been a breakaway of indigenous African Muslims who've set up their own organizations, and they have their own ulema, they have their own Sharia scholars, and they have their own mosque also. So in a sense, they are an enclave within the larger Muslim population. Let me end there on the Muslim issue in South African politics and come to what's happening today or in the last 7 days. So I suppose there has been sufficient coverage about the rampant corruption and the imprisonment of the former president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma. Now, the interesting thing is that he's been jailed not because of the corruption, but because of the contempt of court. He had gone against a ruling of the highest or the apex court in this country, the Constitutional Court, and the court had sentenced him to 15 months in prison. So the forces aligned to Jacob Zuma had threatened for quite some while that this is an unacceptable situation and that there would be severe repercussions if Jacob Zuma goes to prison. So that is the spark for what has happened. In the intervening years since Cyril Ramaphosa took power, there has been a steady but very slow attempt made to regain control of the judiciary, of the security services, of the state-owned enterprises that were looted by Zuma and his cronies. The conservative estimate is almost 500 billion rand had left South Africa, and most of the money is in Dubai at the moment. So there were various charges that were put to, well, he's charged with 734 offenses. And since 2017, we've had a commission of inquiry into what we call state capture, how the state was able to be captured by external forces when Zuma was the president, and how this money was looted from the state coffers. And so when Zuma was asked to appear before the commission, he appeared but refused to answer the questions that were put to him by the investigator and the head of the commission. And he stormed out of the commission, and therefore the commission took legal action against him, and the Constitutional Court ruled that he must be jailed. So the day he was jailed, 24 hours later, the social media was abuzz that there's going to be serious consequences. And, well, many people thought this was a ruse, this was just a bluff, and it went widely, it was ignored. In the last 7 days, we saw the consequences of the government's sort of ignoring the threat. So on Sunday evening, mass-scale looting and destruction of property started in Natal and areas of Johannesburg. And the call was that Zuma should be freed, and the protest, once he is freed, the protest will come to an end. That was the call. However, what happened was not a protest, but was wanton criminality. It was brazen looting and destruction of property across the board. So manufacturing plants, warehouses, supermarkets, wholesalers, retailers were all destroyed, looted and burnt to the ground. And the conservative estimate is in the region of something like 15 billion rand worth of damage. But it was a very systematic, it was well planned, it was organized, and it was well managed. And the government was caught totally unawares. The police were incompetent. They had no ammunition, they had no tear gas, they had no water cannons. They were totally ineffective. On Monday evening, the president called out the army to the hotspots in Durban and in Johannesburg. 2,500 troops were sent, which proved totally inadequate. And within 24 hours, that figure was escalated to 25,000. Now, the looting still continued. And the third force, or the agents within, decided to move away from instructing the looters to go for looting only, but to then turn it into a racial war. Now, as I said, the apartheid stratification, Indian, colored, whites, Africans, we still live in these ghettoized communities. So Indians still live in townships, although affluent people have moved into previously white areas. Africans still live in townships, middle class Africans have moved on. So Indian areas, working class areas where Muslims lived, where their own shops became targets. And the natural reaction was than to defend property and life. And within this, it became not a wholly racial battle, but within those who were protecting their life and property, elements within the broader Indian community displayed blatant racism. So the terminology used against the looters and the kind of blockades that they put in place, where any African who was approaching these areas was turned back or shot at and really abused, beaten up. Even those who were in a car were turned back, were shot at. So there was there were pockets of racial abuse and racism emerging. Now, one cannot, in all instances, one cannot say this is the racist Indian community that's been doing this. There are pockets, and one cannot get away from that. Even though, apartheid had fell in 1994, racism was more internalized, and this was now become verbalized, and the looting had presented people with an opportunity to externalize their racism once again. So there was a greater context to what was happening in these areas. The looting of trucks and infrastructure has been for almost 3 years. The main corridor from the Durban port to Johannesburg, the infrastructure, the road network was under severe strain. And the government had ignored that. Poor people were burning trucks, carrying goods, looting the trucks. There was loss of life, but the government just refused to take any action. Similarly, there were a lot of political assassinations in KwaZulu-Natal. And again, the government turned a blind eye to it. So political opponents to the ANC, activists who were coming out in protest against the corruption and lack of service delivery were assassinated. High-profile politicians were assassinated, and there was almost a low-intensity warfare taking place. So this was the political context in which the present crisis emerged. How does this thing pan out for the future? And what role do Muslims play? I said, on the one hand, the awkward question of racism needs to be addressed immediately. Muslims have been grappling but not serious enough, and I think we need a different paradigm and a different discourse in addressing this issue immediately. It cannot be delayed any longer. Number two, the looting that took place, there has been various interpretations and analysis of that because of the inequality within the system. We have to be frank, the ANC failed the vast majority of the indigenous African population, and it failed the minority communities. So Indians who have been living on the margins before the pandemic have been totally devastated after the pandemic. And it's much worse for the indigenous African population, who form the majority in South Africa. So there has to be a realignment and a re-engagement with the indigenous population, not as the haves and the have-not, but as fellow citizens who have a serious investment in South Africa. And for me, just to end off on this note, and I think probably it's a controversial one, but I think Muslims are very forthcoming in charity, and this is quite evident in the last 7 days, in the last 48 hours, where trucks have been sent from Johannesburg with thousands and thousands of loaves of bread and milk and food and all of that. And planes have been flying in from Cape Town and Johannesburg with baby food and milk. So in terms of the generosity and the giving of, Muslims in South Africa are almost unmatched. But I think that has to be realigned. The giving of charity, the zakat, it is not, in my mind, a sustainable means of empowering and getting people out of poverty. There has to be a new discourse around our charity, whether it's zakat or sadaqah or whatever. And it needs new kind of thinking. The conservative thinking is problematic, outdated. It's entrenched in thinking that has not taken into consideration the changing political climates. And also we need, as Muslims, to renew the social contract with the state and government and with our fellow beings. So with these few points, I know I've been kind of all over the place, but I hope it has given you some indication of where we are presently. Thank you, Migdad.
Thank you very much for speaking to us and giving us a real insights about what's happening in South Africa in the recent times and how it needs to go going forward. There have been, if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to ask them on WhatsApp or on Facebook or on YouTube. And we're happy to obviously facilitate those questions. So let's start with the first question, which is from YouTube. From Ahmed Hassan. There's a lot of attention in international and social media on Indians being targeted in the last few days. How much truth is there in that actual portrayal?
So let me make it very, very clear. Indians are not targeted. Indians have not been targeted as a group, as an ethnic group. Muslims have not been targeted as a religious group. So none of that is true. So let me just park that aside and come back to it. So in the looting and the destruction of property, I would say 80% of the small businesses that have been destroyed, 80% of the small businesses that have been destroyed belong to Black African. So in the center of Durban, which has predominantly Black African trade, those businesses have been completely destroyed. So that's 80%. So if there was any targeting of businesses, it was Black African businesses that have been targeted. The factories, warehouses belong to Indians, belong to Muslims, belong to whites, belong to Africans. So again, no specific ethnic group, no specific religious group has been targeted. Let me come to the point about whether Indians have been targeted. There has been a very concerted effort made by the third force that we call the Zuma aligned factions to turn this into a race conflict, to turn this into a race war. And I said there have been elements within the Indian community who have made racist comments and have indulged in this kind of racism. But by and large, the Indian community has stayed away from that kind of racist attitude. At this time, they haven't engaged in that. And therefore, those who are trying to foment this racial conflict have failed. In fact, the whole project in the last 7 days to destabilize the country, to destabilize the government has failed. To go into the political dimensions of this present crisis, it was Zuma's allies who increasingly began to feel the legal noose tightening around their necks because of their role in corruption, decided to then confront the state. Because sooner or later, many of Zuma's close allies are going to land up in jail. And they thought that by destabilizing the state and its institutions, its criminal justice system, they would escape punishment. But that project has failed. And the project to then create this racial war has failed. I just want to make another point, that in the mix of this racism that has emerged, unfortunately, African Muslims became victims of that also. So it was not just indigenous Africans of different faiths, but it was indigenous Africans of the Muslim faith who were subject to this racism also. So this adds to the already negative perception that people have of Indian Muslims. Even though in the present crisis, the element of racism is small. But with social media, Twitter and Facebook and what have you, it is expanded, it is amplified. So I hope that answers the question about Muslims, Indians being targeted. Indians are not being targeted. I think that report in the Indian TV, I don't know what channel it was purely sensationalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. A couple of small questions. You mentioned that Muslims there are two members of the ANC who are Muslims and more within the opposition. And you said, I think, that there were a very small number of cabinet ministers now compared to what they were before. Can you just lay out how many cabinet members there are in total and how many Muslims are part of it and what the proportion of Muslims is in South Africa?
So ministers, we have 27 ministers. And then we have like 36 deputy ministers. I mean, up to today, I don't know what role they play, but they are there. But this is the whole, cronyism and nepotism in appointing people who are close to the ANC and all ANC people. It's what they call cadre deployment. So if you're an ANC member of good standing, you get a job, to be in parliament, to be in cabinet minister, and you head some of the state-owned enterprises. So during Mandela's time, we had the chief, let me just pull up a document that I have, and I'll have, so the first chief justice in South Africa, during the advent of democracy, was a Muslim, Justice Ismail Mohammed. Brilliant man, brilliant legal mind, and he was appointed by Mandela. And during that time, we had the Minister of Education was Muslim. He then became Minister of Water Affairs. The Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs was Muslim. We had a Deputy Minister was Home Affairs. So we had 7 or 8 of them being ministers. During Thabo Mbeki's time, his Chief of Staff was Muslim. The Minister of Justice was Muslim. Then he became Minister of Transport. So between the Mandela era and the Mbeki era, we had about 8 or 9 Muslims in as cabinet ministers. So out of 27, 8 or 9 is almost absurd. It's absurd to believe that so many Muslims from such a small minority occupies such high-profile positions. Now that has come down to about 2, I would think, and it has got a lot to do with the internal dynamics of the ANC. That there was a massive move to Africanize the ANC, and therefore prominent Indians who had who were part of the struggle were marginalized in the last 10 years or so. And so even at local level, at provincial level, and at national level, those figures have dwindled considerably. So 2 out of 27 now, even though we still 1.5, we make up, Indians make up less than 3% of the total South African population. So the South African population is 59 million. Indians are about 1.5. I would think it's now 2 million with foreign with people from Pakistan and India and Bangladesh coming in, and I think Muslims would be 1 million. So 2 million of 59 million is about 2.6 million. So it's a small number, but during the time of Mandela and Mbeki, what do you say? We're punching above our weight.
Thank you very much. Final question, just because I think we're running out of time. Maghrib's come,
yeah.
But and we've got a couple of quick things to announce and have a quick discussion afterwards. So the final questions are: can you tell us something about the Guptas and their role in current events?
Well, they were yeah.
And secondly, just linked to that, is there much talk about Indians? Is there much talk amongst Indians about leaving? And if so, where would they go to?
Okay, let me answer the second question. Indians got nowhere else to go to. Maybe affluent people who have money in foreign bank accounts, have family, they would probably go. But by and large, I would say 85-90% of the Muslims have nowhere else to go to. There is a tenuous relationship with India. People go and visit India, go and see the Taj Mahal, go and have try and go to their villages, meet their family, look at their family, and say, okay, we're not coming back to this village, and stay in South Africa. So they really don't have anywhere else to go to, and there is no talk about that. Even during the height of apartheid, when the oppression was severe, there was no talk of Muslims leaving. The Guptas have been the source of the problems in South Africa during the time of Zuma. They were this family from India that came in, fraternized with Zuma and all his close allies, and landed fat, lucrative contracts, what we call tenders. They captured many of the state institutions, mostly the energy sector. And so those contracts were running into billions and billions and billions of dollars. And to the extent where they became so powerful that they were deciding which ministers to be appointed, which ministers to be fired, and which CEO should join which state-owned enterprise. So they became a force within government, and that is why this commission of inquiry was called the State Capture Inquiry. How was this Indian family allowed to capture Zuma and the government and the state. And because of that corruption, all these cases, all these charges were laid against Zuma and all his friends and allies. So they have played a major role in the last 10 years in really gutting the state coffers and looting the state coffers. They are now living in Dubai off the riches of our state coffers.
Thank you very much. And you know what? If you can answer in 1 minute very quickly, there's a final question from YouTube. You correctly identified an urgent need to engage and embrace non-Muslim citizens in South Africa. How should we best achieve this, though? Quickly.
Well, first of all, the Muslim community needs to start talking among themselves. There are many awkward questions that need to be put out on the table. We need to start talking about them seriously. There needs to be engagement. I mean, we have as many Muslim organizations as there are many Muslims in this country. So all these organizations need to get together. If this has not been a wake-up call for Muslims to realign the paradigm, then I don't know what is. If we can't start talking about the urgent needs of the time, then I really think we will be in serious trouble.
Thank you very much, Faizal, and thank you so much for answering all these questions. Many more there, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. We're quite actually far over time, but it shows the engagement and real interest in you and the issue as well. So thank you again very much for giving us the opportunity and the honor of listening to you, hearing from you, and benefiting from your talks. And inshallah, those who weren't able to listen to all of it, obviously it's all on YouTube. You'll be able to watch it at any time and inshallah participate and engage with it at a later stage. So thank you, Faizal, for doing that. Thank you,
Mikdad, and thank you to Mahfil again, and salam to all the families and all the people in Harrow. And Jazakallah once again, and Assalamu alaikum. Alaikum salam. Thank you so much. We're going to have a few minutes just now from the executive committee. The Mahfil is considering opening again in some of our events in the coming days with Eid coming up. And given the fact that on the 19th, on Monday, the lockdown officially formally ends, with that in mind, we'd like to ask, we've asked a doctor, Dr. Kumail Versi, to speak and share some thoughts on what the executive committee is thinking about opening up. So Kumail?
Thank you. Thank you all for joining and continuing to support the work that's going on at SICM. I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes just briefly outlining what we are planning to do because of the plan to move towards step 4 of the roadmap on Monday. I'll talk a little bit about our plans and the plans for the coming weeks, and hopefully give a little bit of an opportunity for people to ask some questions. I'm not going to take this very much on a medical side, just more just informing you about what we hope to be doing in the coming days and coming weeks. So obviously the last couple of years itself has been difficult for all of us. Pandemic has affected us in different ways, and I know that some people are very unfortunate to have lost loved ones, and others I know have found it difficult to sort of lose the community in the same way that they used to have regular programs meeting everyone face to face, and that has a significant mental impact on all of us as well. Many people have told us about the spiritual effect that it's had on them, and how online programs, although they're helpful in some ways, they don't engage in the same way, and some people have moved away and stopped watching those as well, because they feel they don't get the same benefit that they were hoping that they could have, or that they had previously when they met face to face. And I fully understand this. It's a very different type of program, but alhamdulillah, we've managed to continue many of our activities with the online programs during this time. But as you know, England is moving to step 4 of the roadmap, and that's going to be happening on Monday, this coming Monday, 19th of July. And the government website says that, well, now COVID-19 will be a feature of our lives for the foreseeable future, and we need to sort of learn to live with it and manage the risk to ourselves and to others. So with this in mind, we understand we need to take appropriate steps to move forward with returning towards a sense of normality, albeit slightly modified, whilst also making sure that we try to keep our community safe. And a lot of people have asked us about what our plans are for the coming weeks. And so from next week, we are going to be having our program primarily face-to-face and live. So at 39 Gloucester Road and at the Porter Cabin, which at the moment is undergoing refurbishment, but hopefully will be ready soon. Some of you will have already been starting to attend our live programs. For example, the Dua Kamal program on Thursdays, that takes place and has been taking place live for and in person for many weeks now. But the first, I guess, large program that we foresee taking place is the Eid al-Adha program with prayers in the morning. So the program starts at 7 o'clock with Dua Nudba, and then Eid prayers is about 7:35, and we hope to finish that program just after 8 a.m. So although we're moving towards being face-to-face, we do wish to still have some aspects which we need to make sure that we try and keep ourselves and our community as safe as possible. And so we'll be making sure that we encourage all attendees to scan the QR code, which will be printed at the entrances with the NHS COVID app. This will help to ensure that you're contacted if there's someone later found to have COVID-19. And those people who are unwell, so people who have a headache, a fever, runny nose, sneezing, body aches, these types of things, we're requesting that they stay at home and don't attend in the same way that we have been previously for events that we've had in the last couple of years. We'll continue to strongly encourage people to wear masks during the program. And although we are not specifically advocating social distancing during the programs, we are encouraging people to try and stay as safe as possible. And we will hopefully be serving refreshments and things like that, as we had been doing before this pandemic all began. We'll continue to also encourage all attendees to have their vaccines at the earliest opportunity that they can do, and sort of to help to try and maintain ventilation and things like that. We'll try and make sure that we have the doors and the windows open during the programs. We obviously understand that there's significant concern from many of our close community, and there will be people who are hesitant to join us, and I think that's perfectly valid and understandable. So we'll try and make sure that we have our programs live as well for those people who are unable to or feel hesitant to join us during the rest of the program, doing the live program face-to-face. And hopefully that will allow our community to all be engaged and take part as much as possible during the coming weeks. Of course, as things hopefully start to get better in terms of the prevalence of the virus, etc., hopefully more people will start to join and less people will be joining just online. But we're starting to encourage people as much as possible to come back and start to join the community programs that we've been having. One thing that I forgot to mention in terms of the Eid program itself, as I said, we will hopefully be having the Eid prayers in the Porter Cabin, but it is undergoing some refurbishment works, and so there's no carpet there at the moment. So in terms of making sure that you're more comfortable by yourself, please do bring your own prayer mats and turba so that you're able to pray more comfortably and sit down there as well. Hopefully that gives some sort of insight, and I think that if there are some questions, I know that we're well past Maghrib time, but if there are a couple of questions, we can perhaps address some of them now. Okay, great. So if there are no questions, then we look forward to seeing you in the programs coming up. Just to let you know, the first program, which will be live from Monday, is actually going to be on Monday, which is the Dua Arafah program. So the Arafah Amal will start at 7 o'clock in the evening, and that will take place at 39 Gloucester Road, and that will be followed by Salah at 9:18. So we look forward to seeing you then and welcome you all. Sorry, just also to let you know of other upcoming Friday programs. So next Friday on the 23rd of July, we'll be having Dr. Thomas Seeley, who will be coming to join us and speak to us about religiosity and recognition, multiculturalism and British converts to Islam. So this is about his book that he's written. And then following on from that, the week after, we'll have Dr. Amin Ainlows, who will be joining us with talk as we celebrate the event of Eid al-Mubahila. And we look forward to seeing you all soon.